Hello there, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're safe and well. In this video we'll be talking about parallax and other scope errors, and we'll also be looking at magnification. So let's roll the titles. First, we're going to deal with parallax then. So what is parallax? Well, I found a definition that says it's a difference in the apparent position of an object viewed along two different lines of sight. That's the simplest definition that I can find. And in our instance here, parallax is probably better referred to as image shift. So before we begin talking any further, I did a demonstration just to show what it is and why it might be a problem for us. So let's have a look at that demo, shall we? So here's our demonstration setup then. We've got a cardboard tube representing our scope, and I've put some wire across the end to create a rudimentary reticle. And we'll assume that the tripod stand is the rifle. And we'll also, and I've got a target set up on the wall there. So if we assume that the rifle is set up in a stand with the rifle aligned perfectly, so that if we pull the trigger, the pellet will hit the center of the bullseye, okay? And then look through with our eye placement correct, that would be the picture we see with the reticle exactly in the middle of the bullseye where the point of impact of the pellet's going to be. But if our eye isn't aligned correctly, say we're off to the right, or we're off to the left, or our eye's slightly up from center or slightly down, can you see the image shift of the reticle? Now in this position here, the reticle's telling us that we're aiming at the bottom of the target, but the rifle hasn't moved. And if we pull the trigger, the pellet's still going to hit the bullseye, but the reticle's telling us we're going to hit the bottom of the target. So if we believe the reticle and we move it up to the center of the bullseye without moving our eye position, then we're going to miss the bullseye, because we were already lined up, and the only error was the alignment of our eye in the scope. So that is basically image shift and how it's caused. So why is parallax or image shift an issue for us then? Well, the problem is that with our scopes we can only focus them at one range at a time. Now, if you're only shooting at that range, so if you're doing something like bench rest or you're plinking targets at the same range all the time, this won't be an issue because you won't experience image shift. The problem is when you start shooting at targets that are further away from the range at which you've set the focus of your scope. The further away that target is, your eye alignment becomes more of an issue, and the greater the image shift that can occur. So the amount of error you're likely to see relates to three specific things. Firstly, the size of your objective lens, the objective lens on the end there. The larger the objective lens is, the greater the image shift is capable of becoming. Obviously the range at which your scope is focused, and also the distance to your target. Now the greater the difference between the range at which you've set your focus and the distance of your target, then the larger the error is likely to be. There is a formula for working out what the error might be, what your maximum image shift error or parallax error might be. So let's take a look at that now. We're looking to calculate the maximum possible image shift then. Now, I've already said that the amount of the error is affected by the following: the size of our objective lens, the range at which we've focused our scope, and the distance to the target. So the formula then for calculating the maximum potential image shift is the radius of the objective lens, which is half the diameter, multiplied by the target range minus the focus range, divided by 2 times the focus range. So let's look at an example then. Using the scope that I've been using on my S400 and the situation that we've been shooting that, the Hawk Vantage that I'm using has an objective lens of 44mm diameter. You've seen from previous videos that I've been zeroed at 25 yards. I've also had the focus range set to 25 yards as well, which I hadn't mentioned, and we'll talk about that later. And then let's look at the error at the maximum range that we're liable to shoot on an HFT course, which is 45 yards. So taking those figures and putting them into the formula then, we have a max error of 22, which is half the diameter of the objective lens, times 20, which is the target range minus the focus range, divided by 50, which is 2 times the focus range. So our maximum error then comes out at 8.8 millimeters of image shift at 45 yards. Now, from my research online and from what I've read, in one particular article, the author did a lot of experimentation, and they found that in practice, because nobody tries to get the maximum error through eye alignment, in general, even if you've got slightly bad eye alignment with your scope, the maximum error that you're going to actually experience is 25% of like the extreme maximum. So our probable error then, 25% of the maximum, which is 8.8 millimeters, is just 2.2 millimeters. So unless you try really hard to do badly, it's unlikely that you're going to experience an error of more than 2.2 millimeters. So you have to ask yourself, considering that if we're shooting at 45 yards, we're shooting at a kill zone of 35 millimeters, is 2.2 millimeter error going to break the bank? Well, that's for you to decide. So the key thing to take away here is that perfect eye alignment will reduce the image shift to 0. If you can perfectly align your eye with the centre of the scope for every shot, irrespective of the distance, you will not experience any image shift, and therefore there will be no error. However, there are things that you can do to minimise the shift that you might experience if you're struggling with your eye alignment. The first thing is to use a scope with a smaller objective lens. You've seen from the formula that the radius of the objective lens has an impact on the size of the maximum size of the error. The second thing that you can do is, if you haven't got an adjustable cheek piece, well, if you have got an adjustable cheek piece on the rifle, make sure that you adjust it correctly so that it's easy for you every time you take a shot to put your eye directly in line with the ocular lens on your scope. If you haven't got an adjustable butt piece, then you can buy combs that can be fitted to your rifle butt to raise the cheek piece. Alternatively, you can use different scope rings of different heights to try and raise or lower the scope as necessary. And finally, one thing that you can do is you can use a scope extender, often called a pig's ear. These are these rubber attachments that you see people using that are attached to the ocular lens of the scope that are the length of the eye relief that you need for the scope. So you put your eye against them and it helps you ensure that your eye is in the correct position to be in the centre of the lens every time. So that's parallax or image shift and the errors that you can get from that. I hope that all makes sense and that you're now fully equipped to deal with it. Let's move on. Next then we need to talk about Cant. I've done a little diagram to explain what Cant is. Right, so assume in this diagram that red line is perfectly vertical. You can see the target in the centre there and the reticle lined up with the target. The crosshairs lined up with the bullseye in the target. And as you can see, the vertical element of the reticle is not lined up with the vertical line. So the vertical element of your reticle is tilted over one way or the other. And in this instance, it's tilted across to the right. So what can cause Cant then? Well, there are two things really. I've mentioned in the video before on scopes that when you're setting your scope up, you need to make sure that the vertical element of your reticle is perfectly vertical. Best way to use that, to be sure, is to use a plumb bob. The other way is, even if you've checked that and the vertical element of your reticle is perfectly vertical, the other way that you can have Cant error is if you're actually holding the rifle wrong and tilting it in the aiming position either slightly to the left or slightly to the right. Okay, so you're inducing Cant in the way you hold your rifle. So why is that a problem then? Well, I've done another demonstration. Let's take a look, shall we? So here's our visual aid for the next demonstration then. Basically 2 wooden spoons sellotaped to a plastic box. And I've exaggerated the separation here to make it easier to demonstrate. But if we can imagine that the bottom wooden spoon is the barrel and the top wooden spoon is the line of sight through the scope. So we've got our target, we're going to line our rifle up. Now the bottom spoon is the barrel and the top spoon is line of sight of the scope. So you've got to assume, just for the benefit of this demonstration, that when you look through the scope you are seeing the reticle or the crosshairs of the reticle lined up with the centre of the ball. Okay, so if we take our shot in this position with the rifle perfectly vertical, we will hit the ball. Now if we cant our rifle over to the right, you can see that the bore of the barrel is moving to the left. Or if we cant our rifle over to the left, you can see the bore of the barrel is moving to the right. So we will hit right there. If we cant to the right, we will hit left. If we cant to the left, we will hit right. The line of sight hasn't moved, notice. The line of sight, we're still looking and it still looks like the crosshairs are in the centre. But because we're not keeping our rifle vertical, we're actually shooting off to one side or another. And that's Cant error. How can we eliminate any errors down to Cant then? Well, the first thing is, as I've already mentioned, you can ensure that your scope is perfectly aligned so that the vertical part of the reticle is in fact perfectly vertical. And the best way to do that is using a plumb line. Once you're sure that your scope is not in error, then obviously it's going to be down to your shooting technique to ensure when you hold the rifle that the scope and the turrets are perfectly vertical above the breech of your rifle. One way you can do that is you can buy these little spirit level attachments. You can either buy scope rings that have them attached, or you can buy them that can be attached to the dovetail rail or to your Picatinny rail. One thing to bear in mind that if you're competing in an HFT competition, they're illegal, but if you've got it attached to your rifle, all you need to do is to cover it up with tape so that you can't see it during a competition. But outside of competing, when you're practicing, and in any other discipline, I mean, they're allowed in FT, and I think possibly some bench rest shooters use them, but so they're perfectly legal there. So if you're practicing for HFT and you're worried about how you're holding the rifle, then you can use a spirit level during practice, and once you build up your muscle memory, then hopefully that won't be an issue for you. So yeah, there you go then, that's Cant. Just to finish up then there with all of our talk about scopes and parallax, one thing that we haven't discussed so far in relation specifically to HFT is what magnification should you be using on your scope, and what should you set, what distance should you set your parallax at, what range should you focus your scope in at. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what other HFT shooters do. I've got some information from a poll that was taken on an internet forum amongst HFT shooters, asking them what range and parallax they used. And also I managed to get the information from all the entrants in the 2023 World HFT Championships that was shot at Harrogate, and we'll have a look at what the choices of the shooters in that competition were as well. So let's switch back to the digital screen and we'll talk about those figures. Let's talk about what magnification and parallax settings you should set your scope to. Now, when I started, which wasn't too long ago, as I've mentioned before, I'm still relatively new to this sport. I'm also a bit of a nerd, and so I did a lot of searching online to try and find the best advice. Spoke to a few people at the club, find out what they were doing. And the best recommendations that I could come up with for a beginner were a magnification set to 10 times, and the parallax range set to 23 yards. So why these settings in particular? I mean, at the time I just took it on blind faith. With a little of what I know now, I suspect that the reason that people choose a 10 times magnification is generally that tends to be the calibration magnification for most scopes. So if you're using a mil-dot based reticle, the distance between the markings on the reticle are going to be true if you're using them for ranging and bracketing. Also, looking at the parallax range, considering that the maximum target distance that most of us shoot is 45 yards, 23 yards plonks your focus right in the middle of the course. So that should, in effect, give you an equal range of focus both at close range targets and the distant targets. Doesn't exactly work like that, but it's a good starting point. Only problem is with that is it's 23 yards, and there aren't a lot of ranges that have a balled up or a zeroing balled up at 23 yards, which is probably why I've moved it to 25 yards myself now, because it's easier to set. If you've adjusted it and need to reset it before a comp, it's easier to reset it by using the 25-yard target board than trying to have to arrange to set one up at 23 yards. And to be honest, is 2 yards of focus going to make that much difference on how easy it is to see the targets on a course? I haven't tested it, but I wouldn't have thought that was significant. I mean, I haven't got the greatest eyes anyway. I shoot with my glasses on, so don't take no notice of me. So anyway, that was what I started with. As I say, I now use 10 times and I now use 25 yards. Also, another thing that comes to mind with the magnification is that you will find that that the number of fixed magnification scopes that are designed for HFT or tend to be used for HFT are all set at 10 times magnification. So there might be something in that as well. Anyway, let's move on. As I mentioned before we switch to this segment, I've been able to correlate information from an online forum and also from competitors' entries to the World HFT Championships to see what they use. So first off, let's have a look at the magnification. So I put it in a chart here. As you can see, down the left hand side we've got 6 times to 8 times, we've got 9 times, we've got 10 times, 11, 12, greater than 12, less than 6. You can see then we've got one column showing the percentage of people that use a specific magnification that were competitors in the World HFT Championships, and in the right hand column from the online forum. What's interesting, I just had a look and didn't realise when I collected these figures up, what's interesting is that the forum figures come from a vote that was taken, or a poll I should say, that was taken in May 2014 by members of shootingthebreeze.com airgun forum, and the World HFT competition was held in May 2023. So there's exactly 9 years difference between these findings. And when you go down and look at the columns and make comparisons, they're pretty similar really. Bit of a disparity between the 9 times. Obviously less, well, not obviously, but less people are using 9 times now than they were 9 years ago. And but as you can see, 75% in one predominantly in the WHFTO, and 62% in the forum using 10 times. So it's probably, you know, pretty reliable space to start. So that's magnification. Then let's have a look at from the same sources of parallax. So you can see here that we've got parallax range, first row up to 25 yards, the second row up to 27 yards, third row up to 30, then we go greater than 31 and less than 19. And here again you can see almost identical. A bit strange given that 9 years apart, hardly anything in it really. And as you can see, the vast majority, roughly half of the competitors and forum members are using 20 to 25. So it could be, say, the 23 up to 25. Another quarter of them are using 26 to 27, and then a smaller percentage the higher distances. So again, 23 yards, so 25 yards, probably a good starting point. You're not going far wrong if that's what, you know, nigh on 50% of everybody's using anyway. So that gives you an idea of what settings you want to use. I mean, obviously once you start using your parallax and deciding, you can work out how your scope performs focus wise for the close-in targets. You might want to make adjustments so that your closer targets are more in focus than your distant targets, or vice versa, and you can do that by experimenting with the range that you choose for your parallax. And we'll be talking about the focus of targets at different distances in a future video or two anyway. One last thing before we finish here that I want to talk about, wanted to mention just about magnification, which is something that one of the viewers mentioned in a comment that I'd missed off a previous video. If you find that your aim points are a little bit off the mark, so say you have an aim point at 45 yards, which is 1.4 mil dots, and you'd find it a lot more convenient for it to be 1.5 mil dots, you can achieve that by adjusting your magnification. There's no reason why you have to have your mag set dead on the number settings on the scope. So what you could do then is, using your pellets that you've shot on paper and your aim point line, your horizontal line that you aimed at, if you line your scope up, you can adjust your magnification so that you can make that pellet line read anything on the reticle that you want within reason, just by adjusting the magnification. So that's something to think about. Something, if you get an idle 5-10 minutes on the range, you can play about with just to see how that works. But there's nothing that says that you have to be dead on 10 times magnification or 8 times. You know, you could be on, 9.75 or 9.25 or something like that, So give that a thought. That's all I've got to say on this matter at the moment. Let's move on. Okay, just to wrap things up then. In the video so far, we've done all of the prep work in getting our equipment ready to shoot on a range or shoot on a course. And one of the things that I haven't done so far is, I mentioned HFT quite a lot, but I haven't explained exactly what HFT is. And I know I've had a couple of questions in the comments of people asking what it is. So even though there are, this has been done before, there are other videos about HFT. I'm going to head over to Cambridge HFT Club range in the next video, and we'll talk about what HFT is, and I'll give you a basic introduction. So I'll see you then. Don't forget, if you found this interesting, like, share and subscribe. Helps the channel and it doesn't cost you anything. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.